stereo versus mono. Let's get into it. Um, I have a script that I'm going to be reading to you because the high fidelity stuff, I love it. I'm a crazy person about it, but it's not something that I can just roll off my mind as I can talking about drums. So I have to write it all down. So I'm going to be reading it to you. So I apologize if that's kind of an inconvenience for you, but the information is honest and legitimate. So hang on to your hats. It's going to be a great one. Um, this all started because my Hitachi 70s amplifier started to scratch during the, turning the knobs and the push sliders and stuff. So I had to really go into an intensive detox of it, cleaning all the contacts and everything. Oxidation builds up on the copper plating and within the knobs. You got to clean that all out. And while I was doing that, um, uh, I brought my backup amplifier into the living space, into the living room, and so I was listening to music while I was cleaning out my Hitachi, and it literally drove me crazy. Um, the backup amplifier is a Sony Stereo linear legato amplifier. It's a fabulous amplifier. It's actually probably unbelievable for mixing at home if you don't have, um, if you don't have access to a major studio. It's incredibly, incredibly clear and balanced, and in stereo. Um, Now, while I was cleaning this Hitachi out and listening to this music, it literally drove me crazy because I was saying to myself, I can hear all the music and it sounds great, and the power is a little bit more than my Hitachi, and it's interacting with my speakers really well, and because the Sony amp, um this was in like the peak of the 80s where not only did it push the cones, in your speakers to move, but it also had, I don't know how they did this, but a way to stop the cone from moving. It's very punchy, and it doesn't just roll away those notes. So highs are very punchy, lows are very punchy, and but still, for the most part, manageable. You can EQ it to a degree to get some kind of analogic roll off, but it was still really bothering me. And it was kind of like a revelation, a consumer revelation. Now I play that, those two hats. I'm a professional musician, as you can see, and if you've seen my other stuff on this channel, most of the time I'm spending my time going crazy on this instrument. But I love hi-fi, and I love recording and learning about the process. And this one literally just blew my mind. So it spawned this post, and if I think it might help some of you out there, to have a better experience with the music in your living spaces. So let's get to it. Stereo versus mono. Um, Now, like I said, I think I said this. I had to write all this down. So I apologize again, if that's bothering you. But I worked it all out, and I'm pretty happy with it. So if you find any mistakes, let me know in the comments. Here we go. I titled it "The Ghost in the Machine." The ghost in the middle. Why mono matters more than ever. So here we go. We are taught from the moment we buy our first pair of headphones that more is better. More channels, more speakers, more spatial resolution. We are sold the dream of immersion. The idea that if we just buy enough hardware, we can trick our brains into believing we are sitting in the middle of a world-class recording studio. But I want to propose something radical. The greatest immersion isn't a parlor trick of spatial audio. It is the raw, unadulterated, singular truth of mono. Today we're going to trace the history of why we moved to stereo, why we sacrificed the center of the music to sell hardware, and why the most legendary musicians, engineers of the 20th century fought to keep their music in mono. But first, let's talk about your living room. The industry tries to sell you the experience of the recording engineer. Don't we know that? But look at the absurdity of that pitch. In the studio, the music is an event. When an engineer is at the desk, they aren't multitasking. They aren't doing the dishes. They aren't eating a sandwich. And they certainly aren't dodging toddlers running across the room with toys. They are in a silent, treated box, locked into a singular, microscopic reality. When we take that spatial stereo mix and try to play it while we're actually living our lives, the illusion fails. Stereo is fragile. It demands you sit still. Mono, however, is resilient. It is the audio equivalent of a sturdy oak tree in a storm. The exhaustion of the mix and the marketing lie. Next part. If you talk to a real engineer, not the ones in the glossy brochures, they will tell you that mixing sessions are absolutely draining. I know this. If you're a musician, you know this. They are mind-bogglingly just over the top. It's an event to mix. Your ears are bursting with information and trying to decipher space and sound and time. It's crazy. I go on here. It is a high-stakes battle of frequencies. They spend 12 hours a day obsessing over the center. They are trying to make the kick drum and the bass guitar sit in the exact same physical space without canceling each other out. When an engineer says a mix is done, it's because they've found that perfect singular alignment. And here is the reveal. The real engineers didn't like stereo. Should I say that again? The real engineers did not like stereo. In the early days, the giants of the industry, the guys at Abbey Road and Chess Records, viewed stereo as a technical nightmare. They didn't love the holes it created in the soundstage. They didn't love how it thinned out the rhythm section. But the industry lied to you. They told you that the pros preferred stereo because they needed a reason to sell you, in some cases, a second speaker, a second amplifier, twice the cabling. We bought into a narrative that the engineers themselves were often forced to follow against their own artistic judgment. Now, before you go nuts, I got quotes for you. from some of the most famous engineers ever. Um, let's get to them. I'm sure you're dying to hear them. George Martin. Everybody knows who he is. The Beatles, right? This is a quote. You've never really heard the Beatles until you've heard it in mono. The Beatles didn't even care to stay for the studio sessions. They would spend weeks mixing in mono and bang out the stereo in about a few days. They didn't care. That stereo mix was for the industry. It wasn't for the Beatles. George Martin used to mix with one freaking speaker in mono. Let that sit in for a second, because today studios have multiple pairs of speakers. Let this sit in. Multiple pairs of speakers. And it's become a kind of prerequisite, it's a hard word to say for me all of a sudden, of quality in a studio. Whereas if you walked into a studio, let's say George Martin, right? You walked into his studio today, he's working in mono with one speaker. I'd say every single one of you would go, that's not a quality engineer. One speaker in mono? What are we, in some garage punk band? You know? That's what everybody would say today. But that's what he used to record and mix some of the most beautiful pop music anyone has ever heard on the face of this planet. Let's continue with these quotes. Rudy Van Gelder. Okay, if you don't know who he is, that's okay. He's the engineer for John Coltrane, Miles Davis, among others, and basically the entire Blue Note discography. He's a master engineer. Okay. Let's see what he says about mono and stereo. Quote, there was no artistic rush to get into stereo from the people I worked for. They had to get into it because they had to get into it. In parentheses, to sell records. We were recording in 2-track and listening in mono because there was only one speaker in the control room. They didn't even monitor the stereo field. This is music, some of the best jazz music you've ever heard in your life. The highest quality jazz that's ever been produced, that we all love, that sold a gazillion records, was recorded, was mixed in mono with one speaker, like George Martin. Are you kidding me? Right? And you might say, well, wait a second, wait. When I listen to a Coltrane album, I hear the sax on the right and the drums on the left. Or I hear the piano on the left and the trumpet on the right. That's stereo. Yes and no. It's called wide mono. They would, because they were recording and mixing in mono, they would use those 4 tracks. They would put, let's say, the sax on track 3, on channel 3. So it's the channel that you're hearing. as storage. Where do we put the saxophone? And in that scenario, like I said, it's called wide mono. I'm going to get to that a little bit more. It's not the same stereo that you hear in virtually everything today, where the piano is going to go from left to right, where the drum fills are going to go from right to left, where little horn sections are going to pop up deep on the right field, etc. When you hear it in those Coltrane settings or those Miles Davis settings or those Donald Byrd settings, what you're hearing is wide mono. You're not hearing, let's just say you're not hearing any echo of that track, of that saxophone in the left speaker. It's just there as a storage spot in the mix. Now, you can obviously say they intended that to be that way. But in stereo, there's a reverb and there's an echo from one channel to the other. There's the bleed there. And oftentimes, I think every single time, you'll hear in those great recordings, there's no bleed. The sax is way over there, and that's it. Okay? So, let's move on here. Just remember that word, wide mono. It's not stereo, per se. Moving on, I got one great one, another one. Now, this guy, Phil Spector, he's known for notably having done the Beatles after the Beatles, and a lot of other stuff. Go check a wonderful film out. Al Pacino plays Phil Spector. He was kind of the ambassador of mono. He even created a button called Back to Mono, and he wasn't an engineer. He was producer, but heavily involved in the mixing engineering process, and had a few words to say about it. Quote, "Stereo is just two mono tracks forced to live apart." He was protesting the industry's attempt to prioritize direction instead of soul. And he loved the wall of sound that you get with mono. And he thought that stereo was ruining his records. Like a lot of the musicians and the other engineers that I had mentioned, stereo thins out your recording. It reduces that wall. And it's extremely, extremely tiring to listen to, especially in the living. Well, it's already tiring. Any engineer will tell you this in a mixing session. It's exhausting. I know that hands-on experience. It's exhausting. And I don't have the ears of an engineer, but it still wears me out. When you're listening to stereo in your home, it's literally exhausting. Your brain is constantly identifying what's happening and where it's happening. Not only right to left, but back to forward at the same time. It's a 3D field, audio field, that you are constantly digesting. And if you're not sitting in the appropriate spot, the reflections of that 3D field are going to be exhausting for you to enjoy. Stereo is great if you're not moving and you're like this. And where do you do that the most at? In a movie theater. You're like this and you're not moving. And so it makes sense to have it in a movie. But when you're listening to music in your living room, you're moving all over the place. You're talking with your friends. There's a noise floor of your living room that is also being played into the music. So it doesn't make any sense, and it's very, very tiring. Moving on. The boombox paradox and the kitchen radio. Think about your most powerful musical memories. I'm willing to bet they didn't happen in a sweet spot between two tower speakers. Think of the boombox paradox. You're outside, there's noise, there's wind, and there's a single plastic box on the sidewalk. But that music felt electric. It felt alive. Why? Because it was projecting a singular focused wall of sound. It was a point source. It didn't matter if you were standing to the left or the right. The tonal balance was locked. Look at the kitchen radio. The hum of the refrigerator, the sound of bacon frying, and yet through a single 4-inch speaker, the song cuts through. Or think about the pleasure of car audio. It's one of my favorites. For the most part, a car is a mono or wide mono environment. The speakers are in the doors, under the dash, behind your head. Your brain isn't trying to find a phantom center. It's just absorbing the energy of the track. We love car audio because it forces the music into a shared, dense space. It brings back the thump that stereo often sanitizes. Let's look at the evidence. The Masters, the Beatles, and the Blues. The Beatles' process from 1962 to 1968 was strictly mono first. They spent weeks with George Martin perfecting the mono mix of Sgt. Pepper. They obsessed over the pressure of the sound. The stereo version, what did I say there? The stereo version, not even close. They went, like I said earlier, the stereo version was just banged out in a few days afterwards. The Beatles weren't even present in the sessions a lot of times for those stereo versions. And then there's the Blues. At Chess Records, they weren't interested in spatial beauty. They wanted the grit of a smoky Chicago club. Here's a little axiom. Grit cannot be panned. It must be felt as a single blow. I kind of dug that. I like that. So anyway, I go on. In a mono mix, the distorted harmonica and the vocal fight for the same space. The fight is where the energy comes from. When you separate them, putting the guitar in the left ear and the vocal in the right, you are taking two fighters and putting them in separate rings. You've stopped the fight. And in doing so, you've stopped the music. Early stereo blues recordings are often wide mono disasters. I don't know if you ever heard of those, but they are terrible. Two separate tracks with a gaping hole in the middle where the soul should be. And early wide mono recordings, depending on how far your speakers are apart, is even worse. Where I teach, in one of the schools I teach at, the speakers must be 15 to 20 feet apart from each other. It's in a big room with 3 kits. And I've proposed wide mono, even stereo recordings, and sometimes it's just literally impossible to follow along, which I discovered once the speakers were that far apart. You literally can't even follow it. It's insane. Just like I said here, it's a disaster. Um, so moving on. Um, there's a trick. Um, and there's a trick to getting mono on your stereo amplifier. And you'll see that if you get that itch to find out what mono really sounds like, you're going to be hard pressed to find an amplifier today in mono. I'm going to get to this. How do we reclaim the truth? It's called through summing. But here's the modern tragedy. Finding a modern amplifier with a mono button is almost next to impossible. The industry has effectively erased the center from the hardware. They want to keep you in stereo. They want to keep you in a stereo live forever. That's true. Try and find an amplifier that has a mono button. That's to say, you're not hacking the amplifier. It's literally keeping the integrity of the channels. It's protecting that integrity and blending it. It's participating in the production of the sound. When you hit that mono button, it's blending it properly. Most amplifiers don't have that mono button anymore. You got to go to the 70s and before. And even then, it's kind of hard pressed because stereo was really an industry marketing, strategic approach to selling new gear. To have that cinematic perspective, when in reality, it doesn't work. It's tiring. It's exhausting in your living room. It might work for a movie, but when you're listening to Otis Redding, it doesn't work. It makes Otis Redding sound horrible, actually. Otis Redding wasn't mixed like that. It makes a lot of music sound terrible, actually. So there's a trick, though. If you do have a stereo amplifier, until you can get your hands on a real amplifier that has a mono button, until you can find that, there's a trick. And here it is. You got to hack the system, essentially, in an old school way. What you do is you use a Y splitter. You take two RCA cables and force them into one. That's what a Y splitter is, right? And this is a really, it's a really kind of blunt way of doing it, but it's better than the opposite way of just dealing with stereo. I'm going to get a little precise here. In the real mono circuit, the signals are blended gracefully through resistors to protect the integrity of the sound. A Y splitter is a physical collision of electrical signals. It's not perfect, but the truth is, it's better than having stereo. You're not going to break your machine. I wouldn't rely on it. I would use it as a temporary fix so you can get back to enjoying your music. Don't come back and said, I tried what you said and it destroyed my machine. I'm not to blame for that. So don't hold me responsible for that. I have tried it. It does work, but I'm not recommending it as a permanent solution. A temporary solution, try it out. You'll see. Um, when you'll discover that when you do this trick with the Y splitter, so you basically you have right and left coming out of, let's say, your CD player. Right and left, you break this down with the Y splitter into single male output. This male output then goes into a female input, one single one, and that female input on the other end are two male outputs. So you're taking that stereo, reducing it down to one literally colliding those two channels together, and then sending that signal to both the right and left channel. It doesn't re-separate the right and left channels. It then just pushes the same signal to the right and to the left. Mono. And you'll see that suddenly that space in the middle is gone. You'll get a wall of sound as it should be. So you can do this with any, you can do this with a a movie theater amplifier and get mono. You'd be surprised how hard it is to find a mono button on any amplifier today. It's just amazing. And I'm sure a lot of you enjoy listening to music in a car, and as opposed to in your living room, because the car is very close to what that mono feeling, that mono wall creates. Even if it's stereo, the speakers are so close together, and you're literally in a bubble that you don't have to decipher the distance of 10 feet or 6 feet like you would in your living room. That's why, because you're just enjoying the music. You're not having to analyze it as it's being projected at you. I'm not even talking about how stereo thins out that wall. If you're in mono, it's like a team. Everything's working together. And regardless of what you're hearing, it's all arriving at you as a wall of sound. If you are in stereo, it's a 3D field. There's no wall. It's something up here, something down here, something back here, something in the center, and this is coming at you like this. So you're not receiving everything from the same angle with the perception of at the same time. Stereo, it's a 3D image. And the only way that it truly succeeds in creating a wonderful experience is if you're sitting still in a really good spot where that 3D field comes at you, arrives at you at the same time. But even then, That's not reality of what music is. What is that, folks? That's a movie. When you go listen to a band, it's over there, right? You're not immersed in a bubble. And there's another post that reminds me of another post I put up about how that process is kind of taking over the engineering, the live engineering approach to music, where people are no longer able to say the music's over there. Now they're just completely immersed in the sound in a 3D field. That's not music, that's a movie. So that's what stereo does. And in a movie, when you're sitting still, okay, I love it. But in my living room, no, can't handle it. It's too much. And if you ever wondered why you just had to turn it down because maybe you thought it was too loud, or maybe one of your friends said it's really too loud, can you turn it down while you're eating dinner or while you're doing whatever, it's because it's the stereo effect. So it thins this wall down, and at the same time, certain voices become very apparent. And so if you raise the volume up on this, you literally feel like you're being attacked by sound. You don't feel like you're in a cozy room. You feel like you're in a wrestling match, of sonic vibration. In your home, in your kitchen, nope. That's the problem. The history of audio is a history of choices. We were sold a version of immersion that actually made our music more fragile and less social. We were told that the engineers wanted width, when in reality, they were chasing density and focus. Don't fear the mono switch. And if you don't have one, find a way to get there. Whether it's the rumble of a car, the hum of a kitchen radio, or a perfectly summed mix on your home unit, the center is where the soul lives. Stop trying to live in a studio that doesn't exist. Stop being a slave to the sweet spot. Bring the band back into the room. Bring them back to the center. Back to mono. Seriously, people. If you're feeling tired listening to your music, whether it be in headphones or in your living room, it's not necessarily the music. It might be that stupid stereo amplifier that doesn't even give you the choice of the mono experience. The way that all of those musicians and all of those high-class engineers wanted to hear the music in the first place. More news soon. Happy high fidelity hunting. Ciao.